Stress is a biological response to something difficult, something potentially life-threatening, or at least hard for a person. And it's usually a temporary response that happens directly in response to the acute stressor and then resolves when that stressor is gone.
I think that stress really comes about when people feel that they don't have control over their situation or their surroundings. So when you feel like you can't predict what's going to happen from one moment to the next, for most, if not all people, that's stressful. The second you realize, wait a minute, I can't control what's happening on the outside. I can't control, what happens to me or what people say to me or what people do. You're never going to be able to control that, but you can control how you respond to it.
I mean, I think anything can cause stress, and sometimes that stress isn't negative. I want to just preface it with that, but something like a test can cause stress, and it's going to cause a different amount of stress for each person.
I have this one picture in my mind of a student, and this was before COVID, and she came to me and she was studying for a higher level science class, and she was frustrated because she just was constantly going into the test feeling like she would freeze in the test. And I think about all of the things she did every lesson. She made sticky notes and posted them all over her bedroom of things she wanted to remember or thoughts that she had about that subject. So she made sticky notes, she chewed gum, she ran up a flight of stairs, all of the sort of tips that I give students along the way of being best prepared to take a test.
Like, everybody's got resources. Every person within them has things that they can tap into, and you just have to know when it is. Sort of like, here's a good example. I like to think of this as the Wizard of Oz example. So the whole course of the movie, Dorothy's going through, she's got her friends, and everybody is missing something, where they need a brain, they need a heart, they need courage, right? And they go to the wizard because they want to get those things. Ultimately, all of those things that everyone needs in the story is something that everyone needs in order to sort of live a balanced, healthy life. You need a brain, you need a heart, you need to be able to carry on relationships with people, and you need to have courage. You're going to have to be brave sometimes, right? And you're going to need a sense of home. You're going to need a sense of belonging, a sense that you belong to somebody. But the key is that what she realizes in the end is that she already had those things. They all had those things. They were within them. They just didn't know it yet.
I think success looks like a lot of different things, and you get to define it yourself. And when you feel like you were up against an obstacle, you got through it, whether you were really successful, average, or failed, and you got through it to the other side, and you're like, I'm okay, nothing too terrible happened to me. That's a success story.
So when children come into foster care having already suffered abuse and neglect, too often they come into a system that has inherently traumatic protocols. Things as obvious as long car rides to visit a parent, for example, where they're taken in a car with a stranger social worker who they don't know, and they're put in the back seat in a car seat. And they cry and they cry and they cry, and they go and have oftentimes or sometimes a visit that's stressful, in a stressful surrounding they don't know, surrounded by people they don't know, adults. And what we hear from their caregivers is that oftentimes after children have a stressful incident or some type of traumatic event, they experience what we refer to as these behavioral indicators of stress. They are oftentimes incredibly clingy behaviors from little children who are not regularly clingy with their caregivers. Caregivers cannot be out of their sight. They go back, they regress, they go back to bedwetting, tantrums.
Clinginess and bedwetting and stuff, I did go through that until I was about maybe 7 or 8. I still have the type of clinginess kind of a thing. and I showed it a lot more when I was younger. My mom said that every night I would like ask her like before I go to bed, because I would spend a lot of time at my parents' house. Like I would ask her like if her job was to like protect me.
Children are not inherently resilient. Resilience is something that is acquired. And when you take a child who's already suffered abuse and neglect that brings them into foster care, and then you move them around, and they have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring or who's going to be there for them, you have what we refer to as compounding trauma that they will carry with them on their backs throughout their lifetime.
At least for me, I think the model minority stereotype is really prevalent. I think, everyone kind of saying that since I'm Indian, like I have to be smart, like I have to go into STEM specifically. I feel like that's a big one. And I feel like that can just kind of put expectations on people, which always leads to stress. And then I think other things that are kind of perpetuated by the media are just like really like stereotypical definitions of stress. For example, someone who's struggling with depression is like normally portrayed as like someone who doesn't necessarily want to go out a lot or someone who doesn't look the best all the time. I think another stereotype is just for eating disorders. Like not everyone who has an eating disorder has anorexia. Not everyone who has an eating disorder is like 90 pounds, My podcast is called You Speak, so you can find it on Spotify and Anchor and Apple Music and Google Playlists, and I think like Breaker. And other platforms. If you look it up, I'm sure you'll be able to find where it's played. I have about 7,000 listeners and followers around the world, and my podcast is also in, I think, 40 countries. We basically just started it to kind of debunk like these stereotypes that I was talking about. We cater especially to a South Asian lens, and we speak from a South Asian perspective as well. So we usually talk to people of color and how they kind of deal with their own stress and anxiety in their lives. A lot of our topics cover really important things that aren't necessarily talked about and are kind of stigmatized. We have obviously episodes on eating disorders and depression. We have another episode on heteronormativity. We just released one on sexual assault. We have social movements, and just a bunch of topics that aren't necessarily spoken about as much, but I think definitely need more attention, because I feel like the first step to kind of getting rid of that taboo around these topics is just really talking about them.
The first thing, especially when it comes to school stress, is like, this is gonna get better. I think that that's really important, is to know that something is temporary.
Like everybody's got resources. Every person within them has like things that they can tap into.
Like make sure that you know that your feelings are okay, and that it's okay to not be happy all the time. And again, if you are happy all the time, then that's okay too. But just making sure that you know that it's normal to feel this way.
You should be able to feel whatever it is that you need to feel to help yourself like get better.
Speak up. Find adults you trust. Tell them what's going on in your home. Tell them what you need.
I just want to say I could start crying, because like there's so much at the root. Every single person matters. You are worthy. You are worthy just by being born and who you are. So I would just want you to know you care, you matter, we love you, and all this other stuff is just noise. All the pressures, all the SAT, all ACT, APs, it's just noise. Like who you are as a person is the most important thing. I'm so sorry, my phone's going off, sorry. The phone ringing, there's a stress. It could be a stress in all of our lives.
Okay,
Oh, so sorry, I forgot to turn that off.
Tanika, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? This is a sound check.
Oh, what did I have for breakfast this morning? Actually, you don't want to know what I had for breakfast this morning.
Cool.
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one.
Fine.